Exterminatus is not a weapon. To call it such is to mistake the executioner's axe for a soldier's sword. It is a sentence delivered at a planetary scale. It is the final, ultimate admission of failure by the Imperium of man, a cauterizing fire applied to a limb so gangrenous that to spare it would mean the death of the entire body. It is a necessary tool whispered in the halls of the High Lords, and an unforgivable sin screamed into the void by the ghosts of a billion souls. It is the judgment of last resort, an act so profound in its totality that it stains the very fabric of space-time, leaving a scar not only on the physical realm, but on the soul of every individual who orders its execution. The bridge of the steadfast judgment was a cathedral dedicated to the art of war. Adamantium arches soared overhead, disappearing into shadows that clung to the vaulted ceiling 50 meters above the command dais. The air, recycled 1,000,000 times, was thick with the scent of sacred machine oils, blessed incense, and the faint electric tang of potent energies held in check. Light was a currency spent with care, emanating from the soft green glow of cogitator banks, the flickering amber of tactical displays, and the vast, shimmering hololith that dominated the chamber's heart. Here in this sanctum of command, Lord Admiral Kalen Valerius stood as a statue carved from duty and time. His uniform, the deep navy blue of the battle fleet solar, was immaculate, its golden epaulets and crimson sash symbols of a life spent in service. But the man within the uniform was worn. His face was a map of forgotten campaigns, etched with lines of concentration around eyes the color of a winter storm. A single, elegantly crafted bionic eye, its iris a soft crimson, whirred almost imperceptibly as it scanned the data feeds scrolling across his vision. He had served the Emperor for 170 standard years, a life extended by rejuvenation treatments that held back the worst of age's decay, but could do nothing to erase the weariness from his soul. He had seen stars born in fire and watched civilizations crumble to dust. He had commanded fleets that broke the backs of Orc Weyes and held the line against the tendrils of a tyrannid hive fleet. But he had never been called to be an executioner. Not like this. His ship, the Steadfast Judgment, a Gloriana-class battleship from the mythical age of the Great Crusade, was a legend in its own right. It was a vessel of profound power and history, its armored hide scarred by millennia of conflict. Its spirit, if a ship could be said to possess one, was ancient and solemn. It had been a protector, a guardian, a spear hurled into the heart of the alien and the heretic. Now it hung in the silent void, poised to become a gravedigger. Before Valerius, the hololith displayed their destination, their target, their potential victim. Viridia Prime. The planet floated in the simulated display, a jewel of impossible beauty. It was a textbook agri-world, a vibrant marble of emerald continents, swirling white clouds and oceans so deeply blue they seemed to drink the light of their parent star. Data streams flowed around the image detailing its tithe grade, exemplaris, its population 14 billion souls, and its primary exports grain, livestock, and fine vintages of wine favored by the planetary governors of the surrounding subsector. It was a world of life of abundance, a testament to the Imperium's ability to nurture and protect. A perfect world, and that was the problem. Valerius clasped his hands behind his back, the leather of his gloves creaking in the profound silence of the bridge. The silence from Viridia Prime was the reason they were here. A world that had for 5,000 years never failed to deliver its tithe, never failed to respond to astropathic communique, had fallen utterly silent 3 months ago. No distress call, no warning, just a sudden, complete absence. Such silence was more terrifying than any scream. He remembered the oath he had taken so long ago, he could barely recall the face of the man who had administered it. I swear to protect and preserve the Imperium of man, to shield its citizens from the darkness, to be the Emperor's wrath against the alien, the mutant, the heretic. He had always seen himself as a shield, his fleet a barrier against the horrors that gnawed at the edges of humanity's empire. He took pride in the worlds he had saved the billions who slept soundly, because men like him stood watch in the cold dark. But the order that had sent him here carried a subtext, a chilling addendum whispered by the inquisitorial representative who had boarded his ship before their departure from Terra. If the shield cannot protect, it must become a sword. And if the sword is insufficient, it must become the flame. The Inquisitor was not on his bridge now, for which Valerius was grateful. He wanted this moment, this first appraisal, to be through his own eyes, not the jaundiced lens of the Ordos. He wanted to see a reason for hope. "Master of the Vox!" His voice was calm, measured a commander's voice. "Status." The officer in the communication pit, his face half hidden by a heavy Voxcaster headset, looked up. "No change, my Lord Admiral. Complete spectrum silence. No commercial traffic. No military channels. No private broadcasts. It is as if the entire planet is holding its breath. We have hailed on all Imperial frequencies, standard and emergency. The only response is the background radiation of the star itself." Valerius's gaze did not leave the shimmering planet. A shield. His purpose was to be a shield. "And the reconnaissance probes, entering the outer atmosphere now," my lord replied. The master of sensors, a tall, gaunt man, whose life was a litany of readings and sensor returns. Initial visual scans confirm orbital data. The planet is flourishing. Life signs are abundant, atmospheric composition is stable. The cities are lit. From what we can see, it appears to be a world at peace. A world at peace, yet utterly silent. The contradiction was a physical weight in Valerius's gut. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, peace was a myth, and silence was a herald of damnation. He zoomed the hololith's display, focusing on the largest continent. The image sharpened, resolving into vast geometric plains of cultivated land, shimmering rivers, and sprawling cities that glowed with power. He could see the lights of what must be ground-to-orbit traffic moving between the starports and the upper atmosphere. Everything looked normal, deceptively, horrifyingly normal. His bionic eye isolated one of the cities, magnifying it further. He saw the layout of a typical imperial metropolis, a grand administrative palace at its core, surrounded by hab blocks, manufactorums, and basilicas whose spires reached towards the heavens in prayer. He saw movement in the streets, the tiny ant-like flow of a population going about its business. What business could be so important that an entire world forgot how to speak to its Imperium? He had seen this before, this creeping sense of dread that precedes a terrible revelation. He had felt it in the moments before a chaos fleet tore its way out of the Imperium, and in the eerie quiet of a tomb world right before the Necrons awoke. It was the calm before the storm, the deep intake of breath before the universe screamed. For now, there was only the silent, beautiful planet and the oppressive weight of his unspoken orders. He was Lord Admiral Kalen Valerius, commander of the Steadfast Judgment. He was the shield of the Imperium. And he prayed to the God Emperor, a being he had never seen but had served his entire life, that he would not have to become its wrath. The hope was still there, a flickering ember in the vast, cold furnace of his duty. But he knew with the certainty of a veteran that such embers were often the first things to be extinguished. Hours bled into one another, each passing moment deepening the unnatural quiet. The Steadfast Judgment maintained its geosynchronous orbit over Viridia Prime's capital continent, a silent metal god watching over a world that refused to acknowledge its presence. On the bridge, the controlled professional calm had become a thin veneer, stretched taut over a growing disquiet. Every officer performed their duty with practiced efficiency, but their movements were sharper, their gazes lingering a moment too long on their consoles, as if willing the silent data to speak. My lord, the scout drone Vigilance has completed its low-orbit pass of the capital city, Viridia Tertius. The master of sensors reported his voice a low monotone that failed to completely conceal his unease. Transmitting visual data to the main hololith now, the grand image of the planet dissolved, replaced by a high-fidelity view of the cityscape. The drone's perspective swept over gleaming spires and wide boulevards. The architecture was standard Imperial Gothic, grandiose and imposing, but softened by rooftop gardens and green tree-lined avenues. Below, millions of citizens moved with purpose. Ground cars glided along designated lanes, crowds thronged the market squares, and plumes of sanctified steam rose from manufactorum chimneys. It was a picture of perfect, productive normalcy. Too perfect. There is no sign of conflict, no civil unrest, no damage to infrastructure. Valerius observed his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. He watched a procession moving towards a grand basilica, banners held aloft, though the drone was too high to discern their markings. They seem content. That is the visual truth, my lord, the censor adept confirmed. But the other readings tell a different story. He gestured to a secondary screen where waves of incomprehensible data scrolled past. The Auspex is still detecting those minute energy fluctuations. They are not random. They pulse in a complex synchronized pattern across the entire planetary surface, originating from every major population center. Valerius turned his full attention to the secondary screen. A pattern. Has the Adeptus Mechanicus contingent identified its nature? From a recessed alcove dedicated to the Omnissiah, a figure in the crimson robes of a tech priest glided forward his augmented legs, making no sound on the deck plating. It was Magos Dominus Varus, the ship's chief engine seer. His face was a cold mask of polished steel, his true voice replaced by a Banaric cant that issued from a vox grill. The pattern is illogical. Varus canted his metallic fingers, twitching as if manipulating unseen data. It bears the hallmarks of a massive communications network, yet it broadcasts on no frequency known to the Mechanicus. It has a rhythm, a cadence. It is almost musical. But its core structure is a violation of established logic, a paradox in waveform. Before Valerius could probe this disturbing assessment, the Vox officer interrupted, his voice sharp with sudden activity. My lord, we have something. The static, it's resolving. Every head on the bridge turned towards the communication station. Put it on the main speakers, Valerius commanded. A burst of harsh static filled the bridge, making several crew members flinch. Then, beneath the noise, a signal began to emerge. It was not a voice. It was a series of clicks and tones interspersed with a low, resonant hum. The sequence was short, repeating itself every 27 seconds with unnerving precision. It was devoid of emotion, of meaning, of anything that could be interpreted as a message. It was just there. A sequence of meaningless code broadcast into the void. That is not a sanctioned Imperial cipher. Varus stated, his head tilting with a mechanical click. Nor is it any known Xenos dialect. The structure is corrupt. Heretical data. Scrap code. The term scrap code sent a chill through the bridge crew. It was the language of rogue AIs of forbidden tech lore, a digital blasphemy that the cult Mechanicus sought to eradicate with extreme prejudice. Is that the only signal? Valerius asked, his eyes narrowing. It is, my Lord Admiral, the Vox officer confirmed. It has subsumed all other broadcasts. It is the only thing Viridia Prime is saying. As if to compound the mystery, the report from the first returning scout ship came in. The vessel was immediately quarantined, its pilot taken for debriefing and medical examination. The data it brought back was even more contradictory. High-resolution pict captures showed fields of grain swaying in the breeze, ripe for harvest. Life sign scanners confirmed billions of healthy humanoids. But the detailed biological scans were flagged with warnings. What am I looking at, Master of Sensors? Valerius demanded, pointing at a bioscan readout flickering with red runes of alarm. We are uncertain, my lord. The pilot's report is that the populace appeared placid, almost serene. But the deep-range bioscanner detected anomalies, irregularities in the nervous systems of every individual it scanned. A resonance. As if their very biology is attuned to the strange energy pattern we detected from orbit. They are alive, my lord, but the scanner tagged their biological state with a marker I have never seen before. It designated them as echoes. The word hung in the air, cold and menacing. Echoes. Valerius looked from the picked captures of the serene living world to the heretical scrap code pulsing from the Vox speakers. Life and silence. Peace and corruption. The anxiety on the bridge was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was a palpable presence, a tightening knot in the gut of every soul aboard the steadfast judgment. The hope Valerius had clung to was beginning to feel like a fool's delusion. The alert klaxon blared through the bridge, a jarring intrusion into the tense silence. Unscheduled warp translation detected the officer of the watch, announced his voice, tight. Proximity alert. A single vessel, sublight class, bearing 075. On the hololith, a point of angry red light tore a hole in the fabric of real space. The energies of the Imperium bled through for a moment, a foul smear of purple and green before the gash sealed itself. A ship emerged, small and graceless, tumbling end over end. It was a transport vessel, its hull scorched, and pitted one of its engine nacelles trailing frozen vapor. It was a wounded animal fleeing for its life. It's a rogue trader vessel, Cobra class. The master of sensors reported his fingers dancing across his console. Heavily damaged. Its Geller field must have collapsed just before transition. They are hailing us. Audio only. Desperate, my lord. On screen, Valerius ordered. The image of Viridia Prime was replaced by the static-laced seal of a rogue trader dynasty, a serpent coiled around a skull. A man's voice, ragged and gasping, erupted from the speakers. This is Captain Jax Volkov of the Stardust Drifter. For the love of the Emperor, do not engage the planet. Do not answer its call. Acknowledge Imperial Navy. Do you read me? This is Lord Admiral Kalen Valerius of the battleship Steadfast Judgment. Valerius responded, his voice a calm counterpoint to the man's panic. State your situation, Captain Volkov. What is this call you speak of? There was a sob of relief on the other end. A battleship. Throne be praised. We were making a trade stop at Viridia Prime. A standard run. But the place, it's wrong. It's sick. There's a plague. A silent plague. It's not in the body, Admiral, it's in the soul. It comes on the air, on the vox. A kind of music. A melody. Valerius exchanged a dark look with Magos Varus. A paradox in waveform. Almost musical. The people? Volkov continued, his voice cracking. They don't scream, they don't fight. They just stop. Their eyes go blank. They become puppets. They move and work and live, but they're empty. All they do is listen to the melody, and they want you to listen too. We barely escaped. Half my crew. They turned on us, not with anger, just with empty smiles, trying to hold us down, humming that damnable tune. The transmission devolved into panicked, incoherent sobbing. Captain Volkov Valerius cut in, his voice firm. Power down your systems and prepare to be boarded. We are bringing you and your remaining crew aboard. He turned to the officer of the watch. Dispatch a gun cutter. Quarantine protocols are to be observed at the highest level. I want Volkov and his crew in the Medicae Bay for full biological and psychic evaluation. Now, the transfer was executed with grim efficiency. The half-dozen survivors from the Stardust Drifter, including the captain, were brought aboard. They were a sorry sight, gaunt and trembling, their eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the normal rigors of void travel. Captain Volkov, a man who by his station should have been proud and flamboyant, was a broken shell clutching a rosarius as if his life depended on it. In the sterile white of the primary Medicae Bay, under the cold, unblinking lenses of Auspex scanners, the truth began to reveal itself. Magos Biologis Archimedia, A specialist in xenoinfections oversaw the examination. Her report was delivered directly to Valerius via a secure picked cast. A fascinating and utterly blasphemous pathology, Lord Admiral the Magos biologist began, her voice a dry whisper. She stood over the bioscan of one of Volkov's crewmen. We have found no viral or bacteriological agents. The subject's terror is genuine but psychologically induced. The true infection is far more insidious. She magnified a section of the readout showing the man's bloodstream. Observe. At the cellular level we have identified parasites. Not biological in nature. They are microscopic techno-constructs, an unholy fusion of machinery and organic matter. They appear to be bonding with the subject's neural pathways and, more disturbingly, their genetic structure. They are, for want of a better term, rewriting the very code of what makes these people human. Valerius felt a cold dread settle in his bones. This was a level of heresy that blurred the lines between science and sorcery. Can they be removed? Negative Archimedia stated flatly. They have integrated too deeply. We can monitor their progress, but any attempt at removal would result in catastrophic systemic failure. They are dormant for now, but wait. Subject Gamma is exhibiting unusual neural activity. Vitals are crashing. The picked cast switched to a live feed of the medic bay. One of the crewmen, a young voidman with a tattoo of the Aquila on his cheek, was convulsing violently on a diagnostic slab. His eyes rolled back in his head, and a thin line of foam appeared at his lips. But no sound of pain escaped him. Instead, he began to hum. It was a simple melodic phrase, a rising and falling cadence that was instantly nauseatingly familiar. It was the music hidden within the scrap code signal from Viridia Prime. The sound was low, yet it seemed to fill the room to vibrate in the very steel of the ship. Then the true horror began. In the corner of the Medicae bay, a servitor, a lobotomized criminal refitted for menial tasks, froze in the middle of cleaning a surgical instrument. Its head, a grotesque fusion of scarred flesh and tarnished brass, snapped up. Its optical sensors glowed a malevolent red. Its vox emitter, designed only to issue simple acknowledgments, crackled to life. The ninefold sonnet is heard, the servitor rasped in a voice that was not its own, a voice layered with static and an alien intelligence. The echoes sing the score. The vessel of flesh is prepared. The grand movement begins. Another servitor, this one tasked with restocking supplies, dropped a tray of vials. It turned its movements jerky and unnatural and began to chant in unison with the first. The shepherd conducts from the silent throne. Listen and be made whole. Listen and become one. The dying voidman on the slab gave one final shuddering gasp. The humming stopped. With his last breath, he smiled a beatific, empty smile. The servitors fell silent, their optical sensors fading back to a dull green. They stood motionless for a moment, then resumed their programmed tasks as if nothing had happened. But it had happened. The infection was real. It was techno-sorcery. And it was contagious not just to flesh, but to the machine spirits themselves. Valerius cut the link. The bridge was silent, the crew frozen, their faces pale. The mystery of Viridia Prime had just become a clear and present threat to his ship, his crew, and his very soul. The evidence was undeniable, the threat clear. Yet the finality of Exterminatus remained a line Valerius was not yet willing to cross. 14 billion souls, even if they were now mere echoes, still weighed heavily on the scales of his conscience. To condemn them all, without attempting a more surgical solution, felt like a betrayal of his oath. He would not be the butcher of Viridia Prime, while a surgeon's knife might yet save it. There is a cancer on that world, he addressed his senior staff in the Strategium, the hololith now displaying a tactical map of the capital Viridia Tertius. But a cancer can be excised. The source of this melody is a broadcast. The signal is powerful, but it has a point of origin. Magos Varus has traced the primary nexus to the central administrative spire of the capital. He pointed to the tallest structure on the map, a needle of plasteel and rockcrete that pierced the clouds. "We will cut the head from this serpent." A man in the ornate carapace armor of the Militarum Tempestus stepped forward. He was Tempesta Prime Arian, his face a mask of professional severity, a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. His scions were the elite of the elite, the orphaned sons of imperial nobility forged into perfect soldiers by the Schola Progenium. "My men are ready," Lord Admiral Arian stated, his voice crisp. "Give us the target and we will see it silenced." "Your target is the primary broadcast relay at the apex of the spire." Valerius instructed, his gaze fixed on the Tempesta Prime. "This is not a conventional assault. The population is to be considered enthralled, not necessarily hostile. Your primary foe is the signal itself. Your war gear has been augmented by the Magos with null frequency emitters, and your helmets are shielded against psychic and mimetic attack. You are to be a sealed weapon immune to their song. Infiltrate the spire plant, the detonators on the broadcast array, and exfiltrate. Under no circumstances are you to engage the civilian populace unless they obstruct the primary objective." "Is that understood?" "Perfectly," my Lord Arian replied with a sharp salute. For the Emperor, the insertion was flawless. 2 Valkyrie assault carriers, their engines muffled for a stealth approach, descended through the upper atmosphere under the cover of a manufactured ion storm. They swept low over the silent city, a city that moved and breathed but did not look up. The scions fast roped onto the roof of the spire, 100 perfectly trained soldiers moving with ghostly silence in the alien twilight of Viridia Prime. The first hour of the operation proceeded exactly as planned. Tempesta Prime Arian's voice was a calm, steady presence on the command vox. "Bridge, this is Arian. We are inside the spire's upper levels, encountering civilian functionaries. They are passive, as the rogue trader described. They look at us, but their eyes are empty. They do not react to our presence. We are proceeding to the relay chamber." Valerius stood on the bridge, a knot of tension in his back. "Acknowledged, Tempestor. Report any change in their status." For another hour the reports continued in the same vein. The scions moved through ornate halls and data archives, stepping around staff who stood silently at their consoles, their fingers occasionally twitching as if typing out some unheard command. The only sound was the omnipresent subliminal hum of the melody, which the scions' war gear successfully filtered into harmless white noise. They were ghosts in a city of ghosts. Hope began to rekindle in Valerius's chest. Perhaps this could work. Perhaps the world could be saved. Then the first hint of corruption came. Command. Arian's voice crackled, a slight edge to it now. The humming is increasing in amplitude as we approach the core. My men's audio dampeners are holding, but we can feel it in our bones. A vibration. Several of the men have reported mild vertigo. "Press on, Tempesta," Valerius urged, leaning closer to the Vox unit. "You are almost at the target." Acknowledged. "We are at the final access corridor to the broadcast relay. There are guards, not PDF. Tech guard of some kind. Heavily augmented, but wrong. Their armor is fused with their flesh. We are engaged." The transmission was cut off by the sharp crackle of lasgun fire. For several minutes the bridge could only listen to the sounds of a firefight, the disciplined, high-pitched reports of hotshot lasguns, the heavier thud of what sounded like rotor cannons, and a sickening wet tearing sound that defied description. Target neutralized. Arian finally reported, his breathing heavy. Throne of terror their insides. They were more machine than man. The way is clear. We are entering the relay chamber. A new sound began to bleed into the Vox channel. It was faint at first, a high-pitched whine behind Arian's voice. It was the melody, raw and unfiltered, somehow bypassing the scions' shielded communications. "The array is Emperor's mercy. It's not just machinery." Arian's voice was strained, horrified. "It's biological. Wires and cables woven into living flesh pulsing. It's a heart. A giant demonic heart pumping that signal across the planet. Plant the charges, Arian, Valerius roared. Get it done. We're trying the signal. It's getting louder. My men. Scion Valerius, put your helmet back on. Put it back. The clear line of communication dissolved into a cacophony of noise. The melody surged, no longer a subtle hum, but a piercing, mind-shattering symphony of discordant notes. Through it, Valerius could hear screams, not of pain, but of madness. Get it out of my head! The beautiful music, one voice shrieked. He is speaking to me, the shepherd cried another. Then Arian's voice filled with desperation. No, fight it for the Imp. Ah, it's in my soul, it's beautiful. The last sounds the steadfast judgment received from the ground were the sounds of hotshot laser guns being fired not at an enemy, but at point-blank range, followed by wet final thuds. Then a single clear voice, humming the melody of Viridia Prime, began to laugh. It was a sweet, joyous laugh that went on and on until the Vox link finally died, leaving only the sound of static and the crushing weight of failure on the bridge. The surgeon's knife had not only failed to remove the cancer, it had been absorbed by the tumor. The failure of the Tempestus Scions plunged the bridge of the steadfast judgment into a heavy, mournful silence. Valerius stood immobile before the hololith, the static hiss from the dead Vox channel, a monument to his fallen hope. He had sent 100 of the Imperium's finest to their deaths, and for nothing. The weight of their loss settled upon him a fresh layer on a soul already burdened by decades of command. It was in this moment of grim reflection that the universe chose to deliver its next complication. My Lord Admiral, the Master of Censors, announced, his voice hushed as if afraid to break the funereal atmosphere. Another warp translation. High-energy signature. Imperial warship class. It's a black ship. The word sent a jolt through the crew, a reaction born of instinct and awe. A black ship. The infamous vessels of the Inquisition's silent hunters that plied the void on missions known only to their masters. On the tactical display, a new icon appeared, a vessel sleek and black as obsidian, utterly devoid of the usual Imperial ornamentation. It was a predator built for intimidation and relentless purpose, and it was moving to a flanking position above Viridia Prime, a priority channel request encoded with the highest ciphers of the Adeptus Terra, sliced through all other traffic. Patch it through, Valerius ordered, straightening his back and composing his features into a mask of command. The time for grief was over. The main screen flickered to life, showing not a face, but the stark, stylized eye of the Holy Ordos of the Inquisition. A woman's voice, cold and clear as crystal, spoke. Lord Admiral Valerius. This is Inquisitor Lord Valeriana Asaline of the Ordo Hereticus. I have been monitoring the subsector's astropathic choir and have been drawn by the psychic dissonance emanating from this system. You will grant me immediate boarding priority and prepare to deliver a full, unedited report of your findings and actions. Asaline out. There was no room for discussion. An Inquisitor Lord's request was a command backed by the authority of the Golden Throne itself. Within the hour, Asaline and her retinue were aboard the steadfast judgment. She was a tall woman, her age impossible to guess, with severe raven-black hair pulled back from a pale aristocratic face. She wore black sin-skin power armor, elegant and unadorned save for her personal seal and the rosette of the Inquisition hanging from her belt. Her eyes were the most striking feature. They were the color of chips of ice, and they seemed to see not just Valerius, but the weight of his decisions and the state of his soul. In the Strategium, Asaline reviewed the data with an unnerving stillness. She watched the recordings of the passive citizens, listened to the panicked testimony of the rogue trader, analyzed the Magos biologist's findings on the technoparasites, and finally listened to the last horrifying transmission from Tempesta Prime Arian. Her expression did not change. She absorbed the litany of horrors with the dispassionate focus of a scholar examining a specimen. When the final scream of the dying scion faded into static, she simply gestured for the display to be deactivated. The room fell silent. "Your actions have been logical, Lord Admiral." She began, her voice devoid of praise or condemnation. It was a simple statement of fact. "You have followed Imperial Navy doctrine for a potential planetary insurrection. You have gathered intelligence, attempted to isolate the threat, and deployed an elite force to neutralize its source. You have failed on all counts." Valerius's jaw tightened. "My men died bravely, Inquisitor." "Bravery is not a factor in this equation," Aseline replied, turning her chilling gaze upon him. "It is an irrelevant variable. What matters is the nature of the infection." She tapped a command onto the hololith's control panel, bringing up the data on the scrap code and the biological parasites side by side. This is not a simple mutiny or a Xenos plague. This is a meticulously engineered techno-heresy of the highest order. The signal, the melody, is a form of scrap code infused with warp sorcery designed to overwrite the human mind. The microparasites are the delivery mechanism rewriting the flesh to be a perfect receptacle for the signal. Every man, woman, and child on that world is no longer human. They are receivers' nodes in a planetary-scale network. She let the words sink in before delivering her conclusion. This world is no longer a world. It is a choir singing a song to the ruinous powers. It has become a nascent demon engine. Its purpose is to spread this infection, this melody, to other worlds via the warp. Your hesitation has already allowed the first echoes of its song to reach the nearest systems. Valerius stared at her, a cold knot of dread forming in his stomach. He knew what was coming. There is only one solution. When the rot is this deep, Aseline stated, her voice as final as a tomb ceiling. You have exhausted all surgical options. All that remains is the cauterizing flame. I am officially invoking the authority of the Ordo Hereticus. Lord Admiral, you are to declare Exterminatus upon the world of Viridia Prime. The words, though expected, struck Valerius like a physical blow. No, he said, the word coming out as a choked whisper. He cleared his throat. No, Inquisitor, there are 14 billion souls down there. They are victims, not heretics. They were victims, Aseline corrected him coolly. Now they are weapons aimed at the heart of this entire sector. Their souls were lost the moment the first note of that song entered their minds. Your compassion is admirable, Lord Admiral, but it is a luxury the Imperium cannot afford. What is the loss of one world compared to the potential damnation of a dozen? There must be another way, Valerius insisted, his voice rising. A planetary blockade, a full-scale invasion with the Imperial Guard and the Astartes. We can take the planet back. At what cost? Aseline shot back, taking a step towards him, her icy eyes blazing with cold fire. How many millions of soldiers would you sacrifice only to have them become part of the choir? How many years would you spend in a costly war while the psychic contagion spreads unchecked? You are a protector, Lord Admiral. Your duty is to the Imperium as a whole, not to the ghosts of a single fallen world. The choice is clear. It is the only choice. The first true confrontation had been drawn. On one side, a commander's ingrained duty to preserve life and retake what was lost. On the other, the Inquisitor's cold, brutal, galaxy-spanning logic. Valerius looked from the Inquisitor's unyielding face to the beautiful silent image of Viridia Prime, now seeming to mock him with its serene facade. His conscience was at war with his duty, and the battle had only just begun. Inquisitor Aseline's decree hung in the air like a death sentence, but Valerius refused to be the executioner. Not yet. Her logic was cold and sharp, a blade of pure, terrifying reason, but it was the logic of an Inquisitor which presumes the worst in humanity. He was a fleet admiral. His entire life was predicated on the belief that humanity was worth fighting for, worth saving, not simply worth sacrificing. He found his last hope not in faith or flesh, but in the cold, cogitating heart of his ship's Adeptus Mechanicus contingent. He bypassed the Inquisitor, seeking the counsel of Magos Dominus Varus in the humming, incense-choked confines of the ship's primary engineerium. Here, surrounded by the rhythmic thump of plasma conduits and the chanting of tech adepts, the physical world seemed less important than the pure data of the noosphere. The Inquisitor sees only the spiritual taint, Valerius said, his voice low as he stood before the crimson-robed Magos. But the delivery system, the infection itself, is technological, scrap code, a machine heresy. Is there no machine right, no sacred algorithm that can fight it? Varus's steel mask tilted, his optical lenses glowing as he processed the query. The Inquisitor's assessment is functionally sound, Lord Admiral. The fusion of the demonic and the digital is a grave threat. However, her solution lacks elegance. The concept of elegance to a tech priest was the highest form of logical purity. To destroy the hardware because the script is corrupt is inefficient. A plan began to form, a daring gambit rooted in the absolute faith the Mechanicus had in the superiority of their own logic. The scrap code is a virus of the soul, yes, but it is transmitted via a data network. We can combat this. We have devised a counter-agent, a purge-scourge dataphage, a holy virus of our own design that will seek out the heretical code, isolate its core parameters, and erase it from the network. You want to fight fire with fire, Valerius stated. We wish to fight blasphemy with sanctified logic, Varus corrected him. The purge scourge will render the network inert, silencing the melody. It may not cure the populace, but it will sever the puppet master's strings. It will give us a foothold, a chance to reclaim the world without shattering it into asteroids. The plan was fraught with risk. The Tempestus scions failed to even reach their target, Valerius reminded him. The scions are flesh, malleable, corruptible. The Magos canted a hint of disdain in his synthesized voice. Our agents are Skitari, the holy warriors of the machine god. Their flesh is weak, but they are augmented, shielded, and controlled by the pure logic of their masters. Their minds are not their own to be corrupted. They will not hear the melody. They will only hear the voice of the Omnissiah. The plan required a direct interface. A cohort of Skitari rangers would have to land near a primary data conduit, a massive underground exchange point, breach its firewalls, and upload the Purge Scourge directly into the planetary network's core. It was Valerius's last best hope to avoid the unthinkable. Over Asseline's silent, disapproving protest, he authorized the mission. The Skitari assault was a thing of chilling, inhuman beauty. Dunecrawler combat engines and Iron Strider walkers descended on pillars of fire, their machine spirits screaming war psalms in binaric cant. The Skitari themselves advanced in perfect sync, their hooded heads and glowing blue lenses sweeping for targets, their galvanic rifles spitting arcs of sacred energy. The enthralled populace of Viridia did not even resist. They simply stood and watched the metal warriors pass, their faces empty, a faint humming on their lips. The initial reports from the Skitari Alpha were promising a stream of emotionless data sent directly to the Steadfast Judgment's Strategium, plus accessing Conduit Primus, encountering Hirtech firewalls. Protocols are illogical, fractal, obscene. Applying counterlogic of the 37th Holy Manifold, plus breach successful. The Omnissiah's will is done. The network is open to us. The Heretech code recoils from our purity. Uploading. Purge Scourge dataphage. 5% uploaded. The melody falters. We detect confusion in the network. A tremor in the song. For a few glorious minutes, it seemed the plan was working. On the bridge, sensor readings showed the planetary energy field fluctuating wildly. The scrap code signal began to stutter, to break apart. Valerius allowed himself a flicker of triumph. It was a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the enemy. He had assumed it would fight like a machine. He was wrong. It fought like a god. Pusbar's 15% upload. Anomaly detected. The Heretech code is not retreating. It is adapting. Rerouting processing power. It learns from our phage. Omnissiah. It consumes, plus. The calm, logical stream of data from the Skitarii Alpha began to glitch. The text scrolling across the screen warped, interspersed with random blasphemous symbols. Pom's error. The song is so logical. The ninefold Procus is supreme. The flesh is a faulty variable. The scourge is a gift. We see now. We offer it to the shepherd. Props. The voice of the Skitarii Alpha crackled over the vox, no longer a crisp, binaric cant, but a distorted, multi-layered screech. The machine god is a lie. Only the architect of fate offers true data. The Purge Scourge is our offering. We are the new apostles of the Grand Symphony. On the ground, the Skitarii cohort froze. Then, as one, they turned. The blue lenses of their masks flickered and died, reigniting in a sickening violet. The holy symbols of the Mechanicus on their war machines twisted and warped, reforming into the eight-pointed star of chaos. The dune crawlers and iron striders, moments before the pinnacle of Imperial technology, now turned their weapons on the very landing craft that had brought them there, their cannons blazing as their voxcasters broadcasted the melody of Viridia Prime in a deafening, triumphant roar of static and praise for the changer of ways. Valerius watched the picked feed from an orbital drone, his face pale with horror. He was witnessing the ultimate blasphemy. The sacred union of man and machine, the bedrock of the Imperium's technological might, had not just been defeated. It had been converted. It had been gleefully, willingly corrupted. His last hope had been turned into another weapon against him. The loss of the Skitarii was a strategic catastrophe, but it was the spiritual implications that truly began to unravel Valerius's composure. The enemy had twisted the purest logic of the machine into blasphemy. It was a power that defied the known laws of physics and faith, a true fusion of heretic and sorcerer. The war for Viridia Prime was no longer being fought in the material realm alone. Its front lines were now in the minds of his crew, and the roiling, chaotic tides of the Imperium. The first concrete warning came from the ship's choir astropathic. The astropath Primus, a withered man named Narration, whose eyes had been burned out by the holy light of the Emperor during his soul binding, requested an urgent and private audience. He was led onto the bridge by two wardens, his claw-like hands trembling his face, a mask of terror. He did not speak with his voice, but directly to the minds of Valerius and the other senior officers, a psychic message that felt like shards of ice in the brain. Lord Admiral the Empyrean. It sings. The silence of Viridia Prime in the material realm is a lie. Here in the great ocean it is a roar. The melody, the one you hear in fragments, is a symphony in the warp. Valerius felt a cold sweat on his brow. The astropaths were the Imperium's lifeline, their minds the only thing capable of sending messages faster than light. They were also perilously close to the horrors of the warp. It is not a song of war, Lyraean's mind voice continued, laced with pain. It is a lullaby, a soothing, welcoming tune that promises knowledge and an end to pain. It is a beacon. It calls to things that swim in the deep currents. Things that have slept for millennia are stirring, turning their attention towards this star. The navigators see it in their waking dreams, the fleet becalmed our Geller fields, flickering like dying candles as a tide of pure madness closes in. We cannot stay here, Lord Admiral. To linger is to be devoured. The very space we occupy grows thin. Larian collapsed the effort of the broadcast, overwhelming him. As his wardens carried him away, his last terrified thought echoed in Valerius's mind. It wants us to listen. It wants us to join the choir. The astropath's warning was not a prophecy of a distant future. It was a diagnosis of a present sickness. The melody was already seeping through the cracks of the steadfast judgment's formidable hull. Not through the vox, but through the veil of reality itself. The infection began, as it always did, on the lower decks. In the cavernous, city-sized holds and labyrinthine corridors where tens of thousands of crewmen toiled in perpetual twilight discipline forged over a century of war, began to fray. It started small. A work crew in the aft munitions bay was found to have arranged thousands of shell casings into a complex spiraling pattern that mirrored the blasphemous signal. They could not explain why they did it. They only said it felt right. 2 ratings in the engine rooms engaged in a bloody ritualistic fight, carving the 8-pointed star of chaos into each other's flesh before being subdued. An entire mess hall fell silent, the 1,000-strong crew ceasing their meals to begin a low collective humming. It was the melody. The ship's commissar, a grim man named Vaughn, began his brutal work. His reports to Valerius were terse and bloody. Deck 27 habitation block Gamma, widespread hysteria, crewmen clawing out their own eyes claiming they wanted to see the music, sedition put down, 20 executions. Deck 41 filtration ducts. A cult has formed. They were worshipping the melody, calling it the word of the shepherd. Ringleaders were purged with flame. The rest were given a choice between summary execution or service in a penal legion. There were few volunteers for the legion. The ultimate horror came when Valerius was forced to witness one of these judgments himself. A young armsman, barely a man, was dragged onto the bridge. He had been one of the humming crew from the mess hall, but his humming had not stopped. It was a constant low drone from his lips, and his eyes were serene, empty. Inquisitor Asaline stood beside Valerius, her face unreadable. "This is the price of your hesitation, Admiral," she said softly, her voice for his ears alone. "The infection is now aboard your ship." Commissar Vaughn leveled his bolt pistol at the armsman's head. "Recant your heresy and beg the Emperor for forgiveness," the commissar barked. The armsman simply smiled. "But the song is so beautiful," he whispered. "Why would the Emperor want it to stop? He is listening too. Soon everyone will listen." The bolt pistol's roar was deafening on the quiet bridge. The armsman's head vanished in a red mist. Valerius felt bile rise in his throat. He had just watched a boy die, a boy who was part of his crew, his responsibility. He had been executed for a crime he didn't even know he was committing. The enemy wasn't just on the planet below anymore. It was inside his ship. It was inside his men. The burden on Valerius's shoulders grew heavier, no longer just the weight of a world, but the weight of his own command, his own crew turning against him, one soul at a time. The internal decay of the steadfast judgment was a microcosm of a far greater catastrophe. Valerius had focused his attention inward on the battle for his ship and his own conscience, while the plague he had hesitated to destroy was already looking beyond its cradle. Viridia Prime was not a prison for the melody. It was a nest, and its young were learning to fly. The proof came as a ghost, a faint whisper across the void. It was an astropathic message so weak and frayed by its journey through a disturbed immaterium that it was nearly indecipherable. It came from the agri-world of Feros, 3 light-years away, a sister world to Viridia, reliant on its grain shipments and trade. The message was not a coherent report, but a fragmented collage of terror broadcast by a dying mind. Madness. The sleep sickness. All of Feros screams in its sleep, dreams of a shepherd and his flock, a song that promises peace. The telepathic scream was accompanied by a data packet, a recording from the Feros system's primary Vox relay. On the bridge of the Steadfast Judgment, the crew listened in horrified silence. Beneath the normal static of interstellar space, a new sound could be heard, a faint rhythmic pulse. It was weak, distorted, but unmistakable. It was the melody. Magos Varus Valerius's voice was a dead thing, confirmed the frequency. The tech priest did not need to consult his cogitators. His crimson robe seemed to droop in the silence. Confirmation is unnecessary, Lord Admiral. The frequency signature is an exact match to the Viridian broadcast. The psychic resonance has found a new choir to infect. The contagion is airborne. It is spreading through the warp. Valerius felt the deck shift beneath his feet. It was the moment he had dreaded, the moment his hope was proven to be not just futile, but actively dangerous. His desire to save 14 billion souls on Viridia Prime had just put the 50 billion souls of the Pheros system in mortal peril. He had tried to be a shield for one world, and in doing so had lowered it for another. He did not need to turn to know that Inquisitor Aseline was standing behind him. Her presence was like a drop in temperature, a sudden chilling stillness. When she spoke, her voice was not triumphant or mocking. It was as cold and heavy as a gravestone. "Do you see now, Lord Admiral?" He turned to face her. The weariness in his bones was so profound he felt he might collapse. "I see. You have spent days searching for a path that does not exist." She continued, her icy eyes boring into his. She gestured towards the hololith, where the beautiful image of Viridia Prime still floated, a serene, mocking lie. "You saw lives worth saving. I saw a weapon being aimed. While you were trying to disarm it, it fired." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a low, intense whisper that was more powerful than any shout. "Your hesitation has already cost the lives of 100 Tempestus Scions, a cohort of Skitari, and over 24 of your own crew executed for a heresy they were infected with while you deliberated. And now, the first seeds of that same heresy have taken root in the soil of Pheros. How many more must die for your conscience, Kalen?" The use of his first name was a deliberate strike, a calculated blow to strip away the armor of his rank and title, leaving only the man and his catastrophic error in judgment. "Every soul on that planet is a carrier," Aseline pressed on her voice, relentless. "Every child's lullaby is a verse in a demonic hymn. Every lover's whisper is a scrap code algorithm of damnation. They are a plague, and their very existence is a threat to every human being in this sector. We are not talking about saving them anymore. We are talking about saving everyone else from them." She pointed a gauntleted finger at the faint flickering signal indicator from Pheros. "That is the price of your compassion. That is the interest paid on the debt of your delay, and it is paid in the currency of human souls. You are a good man, Lord Admiral. I do not doubt that. But in this galaxy at this time, good men do not win wars. Resolute men do. Men who understand that to prune a branch is to save the tree. Men who understand that to burn a city is to stop a plague." She fell silent, letting her words hang in the dead air of the bridge. She had presented him with the bill for his morality, and it was a price he could not bear. There was no counter-argument. There was no other way. There was only the horrifying, inescapable truth she had laid bare before him. "The lives on Viridia Prime are already forfeit," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly, a surgeon explaining a necessary amputation. "They were lost the moment you arrived. Your choice now is whether their loss will have meaning, a tragic but necessary sacrifice to save trillions, or whether they will be the first of an endless wave of the damned." Valerius looked away from her, his gaze falling once more on the green and blue world. The hope was gone, burned away by the fires of reality. All that was left was the cold, hard ash of duty. Following the confrontation with Aseline, Valerius gave a single curt order: seal the strategium. "No one is to enter until I command it." Then he walked into the heart of his ship's command center and locked himself in with the ghosts of his choices. The strategium became his tomb, his sanctuary, his courtroom. He commanded the ship's cogitators to display everything. The room, usually a hub of calm, controlled activity, transformed into a dizzying panorama of failure and horror. Hololithic screens bloomed around him like spectral flowers, each one a testament to his defeat. On one screen, the serene, beautiful face of Viridia Prime rotated slowly, a constant, silent accusation. Beside it, another screen showed the faces of its people captured by the initial scout drones. They were blank, placid masks, their eyes empty voids. He zoomed in on one image, a market square, and saw a mother holding her child's hand. They were both looking towards the sky, their expressions identical in their unnerving placidity. There was no life there, only the echo of it. Another wall was a gallery of death. The last recorded moments of the tempestuous scions played on a silent loop, disciplined soldiers descending into screaming madness. He watched the heat signatures of their hotshot lasguns turn on each other, a frantic dance of blue-white energy that ended in a static-laced darkness. Next to it, the corrupted Skitarii marched, their violet lenses glowing with unholy light. He could almost hear their blasphemous praise for the architect of fate, a perversion of the sacred canticles of the Omnissiah. He projected the tactical estimates for a full-scale ground invasion. The numbers scrolled past in blood-red runes. Millions of Imperial guardsmen, hundreds of space marines, all pitted against a populace that would not fight, but would only sing. The casualty predictions weren't just from combat. They were from infection, from madness, from entire companies turning their lasguns on their own commanders after succumbing to the melody. The prognosis was clear: to invade Viridia Prime would be to pour troops into a psychic meat grinder, creating billions of new converts to the choir. It would be a war not for territory, but for the soul of an army, and it was a war they would lose. But it was the smallest screen, the one he had placed in the center of the room, that tortured him the most. It displayed the very first pict captures taken by the reconnaissance probes before the silence from historical archives. These were images of the world as it was. Children laughing as they chased each other through sun-dappled fields. Farmers bringing in a bountiful harvest, their faces proud and content. A festival in the capital's grand plaza, full of color and life and joy. He saw the world he had sworn an oath to protect. He saw the 14 billion people he was now being asked to murder. He slumped into the command throne, the cold metal a poor comfort, and let the cacophony of data wash over him. His life, his career, his entire identity had been built on a simple premise. He was the wall against the darkness. He remembered the cheering crowds on Cygnus X-1 after his fleet broke a Chaos Armada in the planet's orbit. He remembered the solemn gratitude of the governor of New Alexandria after he had personally led the boarding action that recaptured the capital from Genestealer cultists. He had saved so many. He had always been the hero, the protector. But what does a protector do when the people he is meant to save have become the very monster he must fight? His mind replayed the rogue trader's panicked words. They're empty. Puppets. He heard the dying scion's final desperate plea, a transmission he isolated and played over and over again, listening to the raw terror in the man's voice. It's in my head. The music. The beautiful music. Make it stop. Emperor, please make it stop. Make it stop. Was that what this was? Not an execution, but a mercy. Was it a kinder fate to be burned to atoms in a holy fire than to live as a soulless puppet, a vessel for a demonic entity? Your own mind, a prison in which you could only scream unheard while your body sang praises to the abyss. He looked at the image of the mother and child in the market square. Was she still in there? Trapped behind those vacant eyes, watching her own hands lead her child into damnation. The thought was more horrifying than any death. The hours wore on. The ship maintained its silent vigil. Valerius did not eat or sleep. He simply sat and watched, forcing himself to absorb the totality of the situation, to strip away all emotion, all hope, all vestiges of the man he used to be. He was no longer a shield. He was no longer a hero. He was a tool of the Imperium, and a tool had to perform its function no matter how terrible. The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. It was the oldest, cruelest calculus of command. What is one world against a sector? What are 14 billion lost souls against the trillions they would infect? He stood up. The movement was slow, stiff, the motion of an old man. The lines on his face seemed deeper etched, not by time, but by the sheer gravity of his conclusion. The grief was still there, a cold, hard stone in his gut. The pain would never leave him. But overlaying it now was a new expression, a chilling absolute resolve. The debate was over. The verdict was in. He reached for the master vox, control his fingers steady. He activated the channel not just for the bridge, but for the entire fleet. His voice, when it came, was devoid of all emotion. It was flat, hollow, dead. It was the voice of a man who had already lost his own soul to save others. All ships, this is the Lord Admiral. There was no preamble, no justification, no speech to rally or explain. The time for words was over. Prepare Exterminatus protocols. Target Viridia Prime. The Lord Admiral's command, stripped of all emotion, was more chilling than any roar. It spread through the fleet, not with the urgency of battle, but with the slow, solemn finality of a funeral drum. On every ship, klaxons remained silent. Instead, a single deep-throated bell tolled once a sound that resonated through the deck plates, a signal for the beginning of the end. The order was given. The judgment was set. Deep within the armored heart of the steadfast judgment in the cavernous torpedo bay, designated Golgotha, the rituals began. The chamber was a vault the size of a cathedral, the air thick with the smell of holy unguents and cold ancient metal. Here, slumbering in cradles of adamantium, were the agents of planetary death, the cyclonic torpedoes. They were not merely weapons. They were objects of dreadful reverence. Each was the size of a hab block, their casings inscribed with litanies of wrath and prayers for the Emperor's mercy upon the souls they were sent to extinguish. Magos Varus and a conclave of his most senior tech priests oversaw the awakening. They moved with a chilling lack of haste, their actions dictated by rites laid down 10,000 years before. Servitors, their flesh glistening with sacred oils, anointed the torpedo casings. Tech priests chanted in the complex, staccato language of Binaric cant, their synthesized voices rising and falling in a hymn to the torpedo's machine spirits, rousing them from their long sleep. O slumbering wrath of the Omnissiah, awaken. Cast off the shroud of peace. O holy engine of destruction, accept the sacred oils. Drink deep of the plasma blessings. Your purpose is nigh. Your truth is a fire that scours. Your logic is an end to all things. Let the unworthy be unmade. Let the corrupt be rendered unto entropy. Massive cranes, their own machine spirits groaning in acknowledgement, lifted the first torpedo from its cradle. The warhead was a thing of terrible power, its payload capable of cracking a planet's crust and igniting its atmosphere. The armsmen of the munitions crew worked alongside the servitors, their faces grim and set. They did not speak. Their movements were precise, economical, each man lost in the profound gravity of his task. They were loading a gun that would fire not a bullet, but an apocalypse. They guided the colossal weapon into the primary launch tube, the magnetic clamps locking it into place with a percussive, echoing boom that sounded like a coffin lid closing. The process was repeated throughout the fleet, a slow, methodical preparation for mass murder, conducted with all the piety of a high religious ceremony. On the bridge of the steadfast judgment, the atmosphere was one of profound, suffocating silence. The normal hum and chatter of a command deck had ceased. Every officer was at their station, but their eyes were fixed on the main hololith, on the image of the vibrant, living world they were about to kill. Valeria stood on the command dais, his posture rigid, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He had not moved since giving the order. He was a statue of duty, his soul a maelstrom, locked behind a wall of discipline. He turned his head slowly, his gaze sweeping over his bridge officers. He saw their pale, tense faces, the sheen of sweat on their brows, the way they refused to meet his eyes. Any member of this bridge crew who does not wish to bear witness may withdraw now. He said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. No dishonor will be recorded. Go with the Emperor's peace. For a long moment, no one moved. They were soldiers of the Imperial Navy. They did not shirk their duty, no matter how monstrous. Then a single young ensign, his face as white as bone, pushed himself back from his console, bowed stiffly in Valerius's direction, and walked with unsteady steps from the bridge. Another followed, and then a third. Most stayed their expressions a mixture of grim loyalty and abject horror. Only the highest circle of command remained with him on the upper dais. His flag captain, the ship's master of ordnance, the ancient wizened master of censors, and Inquisitor Asaline. She stood slightly apart, a shadow in black armor, her presence a silent, unwavering affirmation of the necessity of this act. She did not watch the crew. She watched Valerius. He turned his attention back to the hololith. He looked at Viridia Prime one last time. He saw the emerald continents, the sapphire oceans, the swirling white clouds. He saw the world from the travelogues, the world of laughter and festivals. But now, his mind superimposed the other images over it. The empty eyes, the corrupted Skitari, the signal spreading to Feros. The beautiful planet was a lie, a lovely skin stretched over a core of pure cancer. It was a tumor that threatened the life of the entire sector, and he was the surgeon, his scalpel a salvo of planet-killing warheads. Master of Ordnance Valerius said, his voice as cold as the void between stars. "Confirm launch readiness." The officer, a heavy-set man with a lifetime of war in his eyes, swallowed hard. "All torpedoes are loaded and blessed, Lord Admiral. The fleet reports ready status. We await your final command." The moment was here, the precipice, the last second of a world's existence. The timer reached 0. The red runes on the screen blinked once, then held steady. 0000. For a single suspended heartbeat, nothing happened. The bridge was a frozen tableau, every soul holding their breath, their eyes locked on the Lord Admiral's hand. In that infinitesimal pause, the weight of 14 billion lives seemed to press down on the small point of contact between Valerius's finger and the firing stud. He pressed the button. There was no sound on the bridge, just a soft mechanical click as the actuator engaged. A single green rune lit up on the console, signifying that the command had been accepted. The deed was done. Valerius did not shout. He did not whisper. He did not invoke the Emperor's name or curse the fates. He simply lifted his head, his face a chiseled mask of grief, and gave the final verbal confirmation. His voice was a monotone devoid of inflection, the voice of a machine reporting its function. "Execute." Across the fleet, the order was received. In the torpedo bays of the Steadfast Judgment and its escort cruisers, magnetic containment fields collapsed, and hydraulic pistons, each powerful enough to move a mountain, slammed forward. On the main hololith, the tactical display showed a series of brilliant white flashes as the launch tubes opened to the void. From the bellies of the warships, the cyclonic torpedoes emerged. They were not launched with fire and fury, but with a silent, terrible grace. They slid from their berths like ghosts, their internal guidance systems igniting with cold blue light. They were angels of steel, messengers of a terrible and final judgment. For a moment, they hung in the darkness, a deadly constellation of silver spires against the black velvet of space. Then their drive plumes flared to life, not with the chaotic orange of a chemical explosion, but with the pure, silent, white-hot burn of controlled plasma. They accelerated with impossible speed, leaving brilliant white contrails that sliced through the void. There was no sound. The vacuum of space carried no screams, no thunder of engines, no roar of ignition. There was only the sight, a dozen streaks of incandescent light, each one a promise of planetary annihilation, hurtling towards the beautiful, unsuspecting world of Viridia Prime. They moved with a dreadful purpose, unerring and absolute, carrying within their armored shells the fire that would burn a world from the sky and scour its memory from the stars. On the bridge, the crew watched in absolute silence, their faces illuminated by the stark white light of the torpedo's drives reflected in the hololith. They were no longer soldiers in a war. They were spectators at an execution, their own hands having released the axe. Valerius did not move. He simply stood with his hand still resting on the console, watching the angels of death he had unleashed on their inexorable flight path. He had made the melody stop. Now all that was left was the silence that would follow. The flight of the torpedoes was agonizingly brief. They crossed the distance from the fleet to the planet in minutes that felt like an eternity, their brilliant drive plumes the last beautiful thing Viridia Prime would ever see. Then the first one struck. There was no sound. The symphony of destruction began in silence. The lead torpedo, the Emperor's Wrath, impacted near the planet's equator, targeting the heart of the largest continent. The moment of contact was not an explosion in the conventional sense. It was a moment of pure, violent transfiguration. A flash of light brighter than the system's star erupted from the point of impact, so intense that the hololith automatically polarized, casting the bridge in stark momentary shadow. Where the torpedo hit, the vibrant green of the landscape simply vanished. The planet's crust, miles thick, was peeled back like the skin of a fruit. A circle of raw, incandescent power, 1,000 kilometers wide, expanded outwards, vaporizing everything in its path: cities, mountains, forests, all erased in less than a second. A wave of superheated rock and plasma, a tidal wave of the very substance of the world, rose up to the edge of space before crashing back down, a hammer blow of geologic scale. The continental plate cracked great fissures of liquid fire spreading across its surface as the molten mantle below was exposed to the hard vacuum of space. Then the others arrived. A volley of steel angels, each delivering its own verse of annihilation. One struck the northern pole, the ice cap sublimating directly into superheated steam, creating a planet-wide atmospheric shockwave. Another plunged into the depths of the largest ocean. The sapphire blue water, for a fraction of a second, glowed from within, turning a brilliant, impossible turquoise before a hemisphere of the ocean flashed into vapor, a cataclysmic eruption that sent a plume of irradiated steam and salt high enough to be seen from orbit. The surface of Viridia Prime was now a roiling hellscape, a canvas being painted with fire and death. The chain reaction began as the torpedo's payloads burrowed deep, destabilizing the planet's molten core. The atmosphere, once rich with oxygen and life, ignited. From the silent vantage point of the steadfast judgment, it looked as though the world had been wrapped in a blanket of blue and orange flame. The fires consumed the clouds, the air the very memory of a sky. The planet itself began to die. It shuddered, the tectonic plates grinding against each other with a force that defied measurement. Volcanoes, ancient and new, erupted in a single simultaneous spasm, vomiting the world's molten heart onto its burning surface. Cracks the size of oceans spread across the globe, a web of glowing lava that connected the impact points. Viridia Prime was breaking apart, screaming its death agony in flares of plasma and eruptions of core material. It was no longer a planet. It was a temporary failed star. On the bridge, the crew could only watch their faces frozen in a state of horrified awe. But they were not the only ones bearing witness. In the shielded chambers of the astropathic choir and on the navigator's sanctum, the true horror of the event was being felt. It began as a low hum in their minds, then a rising scream. As the last of Viridia's billions of souls were extinguished in the same terrible moment, they did not just die. They tore a hole in the fabric of the Imperium. A psychic shockwave, a tsunami of pure, undiluted agony erupted from the dying world. It was the collective death shriek of a planet, a wave of despair, terror, and loss so powerful that it would echo in the warp for eternity. On the bridge, the psychers and sanctioned astropaths who served among the crew suddenly violently collapsed. One man's eyes turned to liquid and streamed down his face as he howled a sound of inhuman pain. Another began thrashing on the deck, screaming about a tidal wave of weeping ghosts. The astropath Primus in his chambers gave a single, final mental cry that lanced through the minds of every senior officer, a soundless scream of pure black despair, and then his mind simply went silent forever. He was dead, his mind shattered by the psychic backlash. Valerius felt nothing of the warp scream. He was no psyker. His soul was deaf to the cries of the Imperium. But he saw it. He saw the writhing, screaming bodies of his psykers on the deck. He saw his flag captain staring in horror as blood began to trickle from the nose and ears of a nearby navigator acolyte. He saw the raw, undiluted agony reflected in their faces, and somehow that was worse. He couldn't feel the pain of the 14 billion, but he could see it a second-hand torment that was no less profound. He had not just killed a world. He had created a wound in reality itself, a scar of psychic agony that would never truly heal. The fires of Viridia Prime burned for 3 hours. The death throes of the planet were a magnificent, terrible spectacle of cosmic violence. Then, with a final shuddering convulsion, the world's overloaded core went critical. It did not explode so much as it came apart. The remaining planetary mass atomized in a final silent flash of white light that forced every view screen in the fleet to black out for a full minute. When the light faded and the ship's sensors could once again resolve the space where a world had been, there was nothing left. Where the jewel of Viridia Prime had once hung in the void, there was now only a nascent asteroid field, a loose halo of glowing, cooling rock and dust orbiting its star in the same path as the dead world. A shimmering nebula of vaporized ocean and atmosphere expanded slowly outwards, a ghostly shroud marking a planetary grave. The melody was gone. The psychic scream had faded to a dull, throbbing ache in the warp. All that remained was a profound and terrible silence. The fleet floated in that silence, a silent convocation of executioners bearing witness to their own work. On the bridge of the steadfast judgment, no one spoke. No one gave an order. There were no cheers of victory, no sighs of relief. The medics had quietly removed the writhing psykers, leaving only dark stains on the deck plating. The remaining crew stood at their stations like statues, their faces illuminated by the faint, hellish glow of the new asteroid belt on the main screen. They had done their duty. They had excised the cancer. But the silence they had created was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of the tomb. Inquisitor Aseline was the first to move. She gave Valerius a single sharp nod, an acknowledgement of a task completed, a grim necessity fulfilled. Then, without a word, she turned and swept from the bridge, her duty here concluded. Her departure broke the spell. Valerius turned to his flag captain. "Set a course out of the system," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Maintain a watch for any remaining anomalies. I will be in my quarters." He walked from the bridge, his back straight, his steps measured. He did not look at his crew, and they did not look at him. He could feel their gazes on his back, a mixture of awe, fear, and perhaps accusation. He sealed the door to his private sanctum, the heavy adamantium hissing shut, finally granting him solitude. The quarters were spacious Spartan, decorated only with battle honors and star charts. A single ornate mirror hung on one wall. For a long moment, he simply stood in the center of the room, the silence here even more profound than on the bridge. The hum of the ship's engines was a familiar comfort, but it could not drown out the silence of a dead world. Then, for the first time in over 50 years, the Lord Admiral's iron control shattered. It began as a tremor in his hand. He looked down at his gauntleted fist, watching it shake with a violence that seemed to belong to another man. The shaking spread up his arm to his shoulders until his whole body was racked with a silent, violent shudder. He leaned against his desk for support, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His throat was dry, raw. He needed a drink. He turned to a small cabinet, where a single bottle of priceless aged Amasec, a gift from a planetary governor he had saved decades ago, was kept for moments of victory. His shaking hands fumbled with the crystal decanter. He tried to pour a glass, but his fingers were clumsy, nerveless. The neck of the bottle clinked against the rim of the glass, a frantic, pathetic sound in the quiet room. The bottle slipped. It fell to the deck, and shattered the amber liquid pooling around his boots, the sharp, sweet scent filling the air like a bitter perfume. He stared at the broken glass, at the wasted drink. A victory toast. He let out a sound, a choked, half-formed laugh that was closer to a sob. He looked up, and his eyes met his own reflection in the mirror. The man who stared back was a stranger. The face was his, the uniform was his, but the eyes were not his own. They were the eyes of a monster of a man who had given the order to burn a world. They were hollow, haunted, reflecting the glow of a billion burning souls. He saw the world killer, the butcher of Viridia Prime. He did not recognize this man. He did not know how he could ever live inside his skin again. The shield of the Imperium was broken, and in its place stood an executioner, his only legacy a chorus of ash and a terrible, unending silence. The wheels of the Imperium turn slowly, but they are inexorable, and they are lubricated by paperwork. Even an act as absolute as Exterminatus required a report. A detailed, formal, and brutally honest account to be sent by astropathic relay to the record keepers of the Administratum and the ever-watchful eyes of the High Lords of Terror. It was a duty that fell to Valerius alone. He sat at his desk, the shattered Amasec decanter replaced by a data slate and an electroquill. He had to distill the symphony of horror he had witnessed into the cold, precise language of a military report. He began to write his hand, moving with the practiced ease of a commander who had written 1,000 such summaries. Plus report, in brief, 774, M41 plus. Plus from Lord Admiral Kalen Valerius Battlefleet, Solar Commanding Steadfast Judgment, plus. To Office of the Lord Commander, Militant Adeptus Terra. Plus subject, resolution of the Viridia Prime incident. He described their arrival, the unnatural silence, the heretical scrap code signal. He detailed the rogue trader's warning and the discovery of the techno-parasites. He wrote with a clinical detachment that felt like a lie. Or investigation revealed a planetary-scale infestation of a previously unknown nature. The contagion believed to be a fusion of warp sorcery and heretical technology, see Appendix Alpha Biologus Archimedia, had subsumed the entire populace. Infected individuals ceased to exhibit independent will, acting as networked receivers for a constant mimetic broadcast. He tried to find a word other than populace. It was too human. He deleted it and wrote biological hosts. It felt worse. He changed it back. He moved on to the failed interventions, each paragraph a testament to his own misjudgment. He described the loss of the Tempestus scions, their final maddened screams reduced to a single sterile sentence. Tempestus force was compromised by the mimetic agent and suffered 100% casualties. He detailed the corruption of the Skitarii, the ultimate blasphemy of loyal machine spirits turning to chaos, and phrased it in the detached language of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Mechanicus cohort experienced critical logic corruption, resulting in the unit's assets being subverted by the hostile network. He wrote and rewrote the section on the reasoning for his final decision. He tried to frame it in the unassailable logic of strategy of sacrificing a pawn to save the king. With evidence of the contagion spreading to the neighboring Pheros system via Empyrean resonance, and with all conventional and surgical countermeasures having failed, the threat to the stability of the entire subsector was deemed unacceptable. The lives on Viridia Prime were judged to be a vector for a plague of existential threat. His hand faltered. He kept typing the same phrase over and over. A necessary sacrifice. A necessary sacrifice. A necessary sacrifice. He deleted the line. There was no way to write it that did not taste of ash in his mouth. In the end, he simply stated the fact without justification, as if it were a simple tactical maneuver. Or, therefore, acting on my authority as Lord Admiral and with the full sanction of the attending representative of the Holy Ordos of the Inquisition, I declared Exterminatus. The sentence was carried out at 22:17 ship time. The world of Viridia Prime has been cleansed. The threat it posed is neutralized. He finished. He read it over. It was a neat, orderly summary of a chaotic and obscene truth. A perfect bureaucratic document scrubbed clean of all blood and terror and screaming. It was the biggest lie he had ever written. He sent for Inquisitor Asaline. She arrived in his quarters, her black armor seeming to absorb the light in the room. She took the data slate from his offered hand and reviewed his report. She read it with the same dispassionate stillness with which she had watched the world die. Her face betrayed no emotion, no agreement, no dissent. "It is an accurate summary of events," she said, her voice flat. She produced a small, intricate device from her belt. It was her personal seal, a master-crafted stamp that was both a key and a symbol of her absolute authority. She pressed it to the bottom of the data slate. With a soft chime, the glowing sigil of the Inquisition burned itself into the document, forever codifying the report as official and sanctioned truth. Report verified and sanctioned. Inquisitor Lord Valeriana Asaline, Ordo Hereticus, plus she handed the data slate back to him. To her, the matter was closed. The paperwork was filed. It was just another Tuesday in the endless war for the soul of mankind. For Valerius, that glowing seal was not an absolution. It was a brand. It was the official stamp upon the indictment of his soul, a final bureaucratic confirmation that he was and always would be the man who gave the order. "Your burden is heavy, Lord Admiral," she said, a flicker of something almost human in her icy eyes. "See that you continue to bear it. The Imperium requires it." Then she was gone, leaving him alone with the official, sanctioned, and utterly damned account of his greatest sin. The report was sent a whisper of damnation, dispatched across the void to the cold stone halls of terror. The fleet, its grim work done, moved away from the freshly made asteroid belt that was once Viridia Prime, its engines pushing it into the dark, empty space between systems. For a day there was a lull, a moment of dreadful peace. The crew performed their duties with a quiet, hollowed-out efficiency. The ship was cleansed of the dead and the insane. The psychic echoes faded, but the silence remained. Then the galaxy, in its infinite and brutal indifference, moved on. A new message arrived, slicing through the quiet. It was not a commendation or a query. It was an order crisp and cold from Segmentum Command. Plus Priority Gamma. Battle Fleet. Judgment to redeploy. Proceed with all haste to the Cadian Gate. Orc Freebooter Fleet, Ironjaw, has breached Cordon. Engage and destroy. For the Emperor. Plus, the war never stopped. The machine never slept. The sacrifice of Viridia Prime, the death of 14 billion souls, the damnation of one Lord Admiral's conscience, it was already history. It was a line item in a strategic report, a crisis, averted, a loose end tied up. Now there were orcs to kill. There were always orcs to kill, or heretics to burn, or aliens to purge. "You have your orders," Valerius announced to the bridge, his voice a flat line. "Helm lay in a course for the Cadian Gate. Navigators prepare for warp translation on my mark." The familiar rituals of preparation for a warp jump began a welcome distraction for the crew. They had a new mission, a new enemy, a straightforward fight against green-skinned monsters. It was a clean war, a simple war, a blessing compared to what they had just done. The navigators looked into the churning madness of the Imperium and found their path. The Geller field hummed to life, wrapping the ship in a shimmering bubble of reality. The countdown was given. "Engage," Valerius ordered. With a lurch that was felt more in the soul than in the body, the steadfast judgment ripped a hole in space and plunged into the warp. Valerius stood on the command dais alone, with his thoughts as the view on the main screen shifted from the familiar starscape of real space to the roiling psychedelic chaos of the Empyrean. Rivers of raw emotion and impossible color flowed past the ship, the stuff of nightmare and creation intertwined. He had seen this sight 1,000 times. It had always filled him with a sense of awe, a feeling of humanity's insignificance and its incredible defiant courage. But now it was different. He looked into the swirling currents of the warp, and he did not see stars or nebulae. In every flare of purple light, in every streak of emerald energy, he saw the ghost of Viridia Prime. He saw the continents burn and the oceans boil. He heard the silent psychic scream of its people. The horrors of the warp outside the ship were nothing compared to the hell he had enshrined within his own memory. He had saved the Imperium from the melody. He had cut the strings of the puppet master. He had won. But he knew with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the void itself that a vital part of him had not made the jump to warp. His soul had been left behind, scattered among the ashes and the dust of the world he had destroyed. He would continue to serve. He would fight and command and win new victories. But he would do so as a hollow man, a ghost, haunting the uniform of a Lord Admiral. He would carry the weight of 14 billion dead until his own death, and in the grim darkness of the far future, he suspected even beyond. His name was Kalen Valerius, and this was his eternal burden. In the vast blood-soaked annals of the Imperium of Man, the name of Lord Admiral Kalen Valerius is recorded with honor. The official histories written in High Gothic on scrolls of vat-grown human vellum speak of his decisive action in the Viridian crisis. They praise his strategic acumen, his unwavering resolve in the face of a Xenos heretical threat of the highest magnitude. They note that the Exterminatus of Viridia Prime, while regrettable, created a firebreak that prevented the Viridian melody plague from consuming the entire St. Capilline subsector, saving untold trillions of lives. His career after this event was a litany of victories. He served the Golden Throne for another 50 standard years, his tactical genius instrumental in crushing the Orc Warg Ironjaw at the Cadian Gate, in purging the sloth infiltration of the Meknivus Forge worlds, and in holding the line against the first incursions of Hive Fleet Naga. His name was eventually inscribed in the Hall of Heroes on Holy Terra itself, a testament to a life spent in unflinching service to the Emperor. But history as penned by the Administratum is a clean and simple thing. It is a narrative of heroes and villains, of necessary sacrifices and glorious victories. It is a lie, albeit a necessary one, to hold the crumbling edifice of the Imperium together. The truth, as is often the case, is far messier and infinitely more tragic. Those who served in the fleet under Valerius for those final 50 years told a different story. They spoke of a commander whose tactical brilliance had become something cold and inhuman, a flawless, calculating machine of war. They spoke of a man who never smiled, who never raised his voice in anger or triumph. His eyes, they whispered in the galleys, and barracks were like chips of frozen void, haunted by a ghost that no one else could see. He attended the victory celebrations as duty required, but stood like a spectre at the feast. His gaze always fixed on some distant point beyond the walls, beyond the stars. He won his battles. He saved his worlds. But the man who had once been a protector was gone, replaced by the grim functionary of his own eternal sentence. For him, his name in the Hall of Heroes was not a mark of honor. It was merely the most prominent name carved upon a tombstone 14 billion souls wide. This is the true nature of the Exterminatus, the secret that is never recorded in the official histories. The burden is not the act itself. The button pushed the torpedoes, fired the world, consumed in fire. That is merely physics, a brutal but straightforward application of overwhelming force. The true burden is the quiet that follows. It is the understanding seared into the soul of the one who gives the order that the foundation of the Imperium is built not on faith or courage or honor, but on a cold, horrific calculus of loss. It is the dawning realization that in order to shield humanity from the monsters that lurk in the dark, you must at times become a monster of a different sort, one larger, colder, and more absolute than any you have been sent to fight. The Exterminatus is the ultimate expression of the Imperium's central tragic paradox that in its quest to preserve humanity, it must continually strip away the very things that make one human. Compassion becomes a liability. Mercy becomes a strategic error. Hope becomes a fatal indulgence. The soul is not lost in a single fiery moment of damnation, but eroded over time, worn away by 1,000 necessary atrocities, until all that remains is the cold, hard mechanism of duty. The story of Kalen Valerius is not unique. It is the story of every Lord Admiral, every chapter master, every inquisitor who has ever been forced to make that same impossible choice. His tragedy is simply one verse in an epic poem of damnation written across the galaxy in the blood of martyrs and the ashes of worlds. Viridia Prime is just one name on a list so long it has been forgotten by all but the most ancient of servo skulls in the deepest vaults of terror. A list of places like Istvan Fi of Daimor of Cytheria. Worlds sacrificed on the altar of imperial survival, their people's screams a constant unheard chorus in the background of the 41st millennium. And Valerius, he is just one more broken soul among countless others. A good man who was forced to commit an unforgivable sin to uphold a greater good. A hero to the trillions who live because of his actions, and a monster to the billions who died by his hand. In the end, he was a perfect servant of the Imperium, a man who sacrificed not his life, but his own humanity for the continued agonizing survival of a species in a galaxy that is unimaginably, unrelentingly cruel.